Stanford University.
Today he's here to share insights from his new book, Living with Complexity. Welcome, Don.
Thank you. Speaking of complexity, shouldn't there be a red light? Oh, you don't know this? I'm not sure this is the room. This might.
No, it's just for the recording.
This is just for the recording, so you can't tell. So, I just finished a book, Living with Complexity, and I'm here to tell you why complexity is good. This is the book, and the cover is two very simple things, a salt and a pepper shaker. So why am I having a simple thing on a book about complexity? Because they're not so simple. So I've tried this question all over the world. And let me ask you, which is the salt and which is the pepper? How many of you think that the salt is this one on the left? Yeah, you raise your hand. Roughly half or so. How many people think the salt is on the right? Ah, many more people. So, if I ask you why you thought the salt was on the left, I get a whole bunch of answers. And I've tried this all over the place, so I won't bother to ask you, but let me tell you a standard answer. The salt is on the left because it has more holes. Why is the pepper on the left? The pepper is on the left because it has more holes. Now I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what the person who filled it thinks. And you all realize that, even if subconsciously, because usually when you're in a restaurant that has things that look like this, you pick one up and you shake it on your hand or on the plate to see what it is. And so part of what I want to talk about is the fact that complexity occurs in all sorts of settings, including with things that look simple. And things that appear simple are often complex, and things that are actually quite complex looking are often quite simple. And in fact, the first thing I want to do is say, let's not use the word simple anymore. People say, oh, I want things to be simple. And I'm saying, no. We need complexity. If we actually build simple devices, people won't buy them. Because they buy them, or they'll look at them and they'll say, well, that's wonderful. It's really nice and simple, but it doesn't do this, and it doesn't do that. Why can't you make me a cell phone that just makes phone calls? That's all I want. We do that. Well, I missed some phone calls. I can't find out who I missed them from. Or I can't remember the numbers. Can I store the numbers of people? Or can I take pictures with it? Or what about text messaging? Or complexity is necessary. Why? Because life is complex. And the tools that we build have to match life. And I believe that what people are really asking for when they say, I want simple things, they really want things they understand. So the first part of this talk is to demonstrate that to you, to demonstrate with a bunch of examples of complex things that are actually quite understandable and quite pleasant, and simple things that can be very confusing. So I like to contrast complicated and complex, where I define complicated as confusing, and complex is just the way the world is with many, many different parts. And the difference between complicated and confusing is in the head. It's when you come to understand something, it's understandable, workable. Otherwise, it can be confusing. So if, for example, here's something that is complex but enjoyable. For the several Koreans in the audience, you will recognize this as a typical Korean meal. It's not even a special meal. It's very typical. And it's filled with things, and the first time you encounter it, you have no idea what all that is and what to do with it and so on, but it's very enjoyable. Here's something that's complex, but understandable to the people who work there. And even you can understand it. You may have to sit there and work through it, but it's all visible and you can kind of figure out what the tracks are and what they're doing. Life is complex. So here's a typical street scene. This is in Hong Kong, but actually I can take this kind of a picture in probably every major city of the world. It's just that it's thriving and it builds up the way it builds up, and there's no structure and there's no organization, but we learn to live with it and we learn to enjoy it. In fact, lots of people complain about the neat, orderly buildings that architects and city planners like to impose upon us. So those are complex things that are understandable or workable or enjoyable. And here's a simple thing that is confusing. What could be simpler than a light switch? Well, a row of light switches, which one is which? And either you sit there trying every single one, or you just say the hell with it and flip them all on and then flip them all off. The world, even simple things in the world are confusing. So here's a photograph from outside my apartment in Evanston. Think of it as Chicago, Illinois. Which way is the wind blowing? This is a real photograph. I did not Photoshop it. And these flagpoles are across the street, and it happens with reasonable frequency, enough that after I noticed it, I could go get my camera, set it up, and I waited. I actually took the picture another week, or a different week, but it occurs with regularity. And that's Chicago wind. Or here's, I'm famous for doors that you can't work, so here's another example of a door you can't work. It's the door to the dean's office at Northwestern, and it's just obvious. You push the left door. It's got the correct kind of affordances. It's a flat plate. What can you do except push? So you push it, and it's locked. And then it has a handle on the right to grab, so you grab it and pull, and it doesn't work. And in fact, it has to be pushed. Turned and pushed. And when I showed this to the dean's assistant, she said, "Oh, no wonder everybody has trouble." Or locks. Take a simple lock. What could be hard about a lock? You put the key in and you turn it to the left or to the right. And if we only had one lock in our life, it would be simple. But we have many, 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 and they're arbitrary, and they're different. And how can you remember which is which? So standard design principles, we put in what I'm calling now signifiers. So I made a mistake 15 years ago in introducing the word affordances to the design community. Affordances are important, but what the designer really cares about is what is visible and what are the clues to operation. And so the word affordance has been badly misused in the design community. And so now I'm trying to back off and see if I can make remedy and say, look, affordance talks about the relationship between a person and an object. Here's an object, and it affords throwing and catching or not catching and so on. But what it's important from the design point of view is the signals it sends about what is possible. And so I want to call those signifiers. So there's a signifier on the top. Someone has painted an arrow saying, turn it to the left, turn it counterclockwise. Or this is actually in my own apartment. I could never remember whether you should lock it by having the knob be horizontal or vertical, and so I've learned this trick from one of my former graduate students, Hank Strub. So I always own a big package of colored sticky dots. And if you go around where I live, you'll see all the doors have little colored sticky dots on them, and my automobile has little sticky dots here and there. And the sticky dots are reminding me of what the standard position is. In this case, that yellow sticky dot says that's the locked position. Or here's another one. This is in the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. When you go in to give a urine sample, how do you know if you've locked the door or not? So they mark them locked. Or here is the Rhode Island School of Design. Do I put the key down or up? Well, the left one you put it down, and the right one you put it up. Of course. So these are all very simple things, but they become complicated, confusing, because they're arbitrary. You never know which state, which one you are working with. And so the solution is signifiers. Now, culture is also critically important in what is complex, and there are lots of myths about complexity in culture. One of the myths is that Asian societies prefer complex, and Western societies like them simple and elegant. The Bang & Olufsen audio system, that's a traditional, simple, elegant Western design. And there's some truth to that. So, for example, take a look at Google. Very, very simple. Or, now let's go to Asia, and there's 123india.com. Or let's go to Korea. There's Naver. Or let's go to, well, let's look at appliances. That's a Korean washing machine made by LG. There's the control panel. And I actually asked my Korean friends why the appliances were so complicated, confusing in Korea. Because when you go to a department store around the world, they all look the same. One of the things I love to do is take pictures of department stores from around the world and show them to people and say, what country is this in? And you cannot tell. You can't tell whether it is Korea or Japan or China or Milan or Paris or London or New York or San Francisco. They all really look the same. They're selling the same things. And the appliances are made by LG and Samsung, but also by General Electric and Siemens, Westinghouse, same brands. But the Korean ones are more complex. They have more decorations and many, many, many more controls. They told me, oh, nobody understands them, but it's a mark of prestige to have something that looks big and complex. That's not Asian. In the early days of technology here in the United States, it was the same thing. We did some studies years and years ago, decades ago, of the early copiers, the big Xerox copiers that were big and expensive and had a million controls and flashing lights. We discovered, my students and I, that a lot of them were bought by law companies. And they put them in the front offices or near where you could see it from where people were waiting. They never used them. They were impressive signs that this law office was up to date, forefront of technology. So again, this is culture, but not necessarily East versus West. So, I mean, we'll continue. That's a complex Asian machine. That's a complex Asian website. Complex Asian control panel. Here's a complex vacuum cleaner. It's the way the Asians do seem to like complexity. Except this is British. So this is the Dyson vacuum cleaner from Britain. So maybe not. Or complex websites, oh, well, that's Yahoo. Or my.yahoo. Or simple websites, well, that's the Chinese website. So actually, the difference is not, there are cultural differences, but surprisingly small in many ways. So if you take a look, let's take a look at what we mean when we say simple. This is Google. Nice and simple, right? Well, what can you do with it? Basically, if all you want to do is search, it's fine. If you want to do anything else, blah. But on top of that, is it as simple as it looks? There are 20 things to click. And if you click one of them up there, not only does it give you a list of other things, but the bottom list is even more. So the menu is labeled more, and the last item on the menu is even more. So is Google so simple? So in other words, to get anything beyond search, you have to go into those long, complex menus and figure out which one you want, and that opens up the pages which you can't figure out either. So the simplicity is deceptive. Or take a look at Bing, which is much more elegant and attractive than the Google page, and looks simple. But actually, it has 28 places to click, and some of them you can't even see. They're hidden. If you move your mouse over the fish, little spots will show up, and you can click on them and learn about the fish and about other things. Now, actually, that's deliberately difficult. because they want that part to be a game. So the parts that's functional and useful are all labeled, and the rest is meant to be kind of fun in a game, and it's fun to discover the hotspots. Now, it's actually a bit difficult to talk about. It's a bit difficult to talk about Google and Bing because it's an ever-changing target. So this slide says there were 28 places to click. Well, this morning, in preparing for this talk, I decided I would count again, and this morning it was 38. And Google, I said there were 20 places to click. Well, now there are 13. Worse, where are those menus? Remember, you could click on the more and get more choices. So this is Google Beta, by the way. They went back to beta, and I don't have any idea how to get to Google Scholar or Google Docs, or it used to be you could get to YouTube from Google Photos or Google this or Google that. Now I have no idea how to do it, but it certainly is simpler looking. So simplicity is a very complex topic, and even if you go back and compare the websites, in theory Asia versus Western, but actually not, because I've shown you that both Asia and the West have both simple and complex things. Which is simpler? Well, the answer is, what are you trying to do? So if you're just searching, then the one on the left is great. You just go and you type in and you got it. If you want to explore, you want to know quickly, hey, what's happening in the world today? Or what are some of my choices? Or what movie is nearby? Or what's the weather? Or whatever. It's all there on the page on the right. And so the stuff with the more is often much better and easier and faster. So again, the notion of simplicity is difficult. In the world, we often tack together things. We make no sense, but they make good sense to the person who puts it all together. And so we have complex things that might be confusing to the bystander, but to the person working, they're complex, but it's understandable. This is a taxi in Korea. And I was just taken by the amount of infrastructure in this taxi. So that there's RFID chip readers to pay. And there's a taxi meter, of course, and there's a credit card reader, and there's a receipt printer, and there's a navigation system, and there's a bunch of other things that aren't visible in this particular picture. And it makes good sense to the taxi cab driver. There are multiple ways of paying. You can pay with your cell phone, or your credit card, or different kinds of credit cards, or with an RFID credit card or cell phone, or now near-field reception. And you can get a printed receipt, and you can even pay with money. And sometimes things are really complex, but it doesn't bother you because you don't have to pay attention. So here's a street scene in London. This is near the Royal College of Art. And just look at the wide variety of things on the street. There's signifiers of all sorts, but signifiers don't signify unless you're part of the culture. So three different kinds of pavement. So the blind can actually tell where they are by the feel on their feet. And the sign for people who are coming from places that drive on the other side of the road. It says, look to the right, look to the right. And dotted lines, but three different kinds of dashed lines. Narrowly spaced, broadly spaced, narrow, double, and zebra stripes, what they call them, zigzag lines. And traffic signals. And what's best of all, there's a person just walking across the street ignoring it all. And so the complexity doesn't even matter unless it really constrains your behavior or it controls or you have to understand it. In many cases, you just can't ignore it. Here's another scene, which is, again, a favorite of mine. It's a street scene in Korea. And what I like about this particular complexity, it's all artificial. Every single thing in this picture, it was put in artificially, constructed, put in its place. So obviously the dashed lines indicate that's where you walk across the street, or the curb, which is to help divide the street from the sidewalk, or the light pole. Those are all artificial, or the Korean flag, or the windmill, the wind vane, the sign, the traffic controller. Even the tree is artificial, in the sense that, yeah, it's a real growing tree, but it was placed there by a designer and trimmed in that particular way. That's not the normal way it grows, and that's not the normal place it would have grown. And there's a wind vane, and there, that's artificial too. That's a bird's nest. It's a magpie nest, and it was constructed by magpies. So it too is artificial. And in fact, in this entire picture, there's only one thing that is absolutely real and natural, and that's the magpie. Now, one more thing about complexity. There's been a large number of psychological studies of complexity, a lot of them dealing with people's preference for complexity. And the standard finding is that people's preference for complexity follows some kind of curve like this. That is, we don't like things that are too simple. Music, food, games. If it's too simple, it's dull, boring, bland, uninteresting. If it's too complex, it's confusing, frustrating. We like an intermediate state. Now the problem is that intermediate state is a moving target. So that when you first start out, you like things that are relatively simple. You like sweet red wines to start with. And you like simple games. And you like simple folk music, nursery rhymes, and simple toys with simple colors, and simple art. But as you get more experienced, you move from that novice state to an expert state. And as you learn more and more, you like complexity, more and more complexity. So the sweet spot is going to change with time, and game designers are fully aware of that. Because a game designer wants a game that will last a long time, weeks perhaps. And it has to be attractive to people who have never played a game before, or somebody who might be good at games, but this is maybe the first experience with this game. And so what it has to do is track their complexity preference. So it has to get harder and harder and harder as you get better and better and better. That's the only way to maintain the interest, to keep tracking that. And this shift gives rise to interesting design problems, because you have to follow the person. And good game designers know how to do that. You also see that this difference between what appears simple and complex, you see that in everyday life by experts. If you look at, say, a painter's desk, to the painter, that's not confusing at all. Everything there is the painter's own. The painter has put each brush there, each tube of paint there, all the cleaners there. It actually has some structure, and the painter knows it. The rest of us don't know it, so to us it's confusing and complicated, but not to the person. The music, to someone who doesn't understand music at all, this is complicated. But to a musician, this is quite understandable. Cockpit of an airplane. One hopes that the pilots do not think it's complicated and confusing. And it's actually very well designed. So things are actually ordered and structured. And I could actually give you about a 4 or 5 minute description of the ordering and the structuring that you would start to understand that it's really not that complex. There's a lot of duplication. All this is radio transmission equipment, and some of that's duplicated. And don't forget, this is the first officer, and this is the captain, and so they have controls duplicated to the left and right. And this is a 2-engine plane, so there are 2 throttles, and if you look at the instrumentation, there's the same instrumentation for the left engine and the right engine. And so it's very well structured, very well organized, and people who have spent years learning the structure. You don't get to be a captain on these airplanes until you've flown for, if it's a large airplane, and this is actually the 787, so it's the newest from Boeing. You probably are not allowed to be a captain until you're probably about 55 years old when you finally reach that level. You're about ready for retirement. It takes a long time to get up there. Well, consider the standard messy desk. This is Al Gore's office. But the rule is offices that look messy, the people who live in them usually are very effective at finding things. They know where the piles are. They know where they put things. They know that each pile is ordered in time, so they also know when they go to that pile, they know they're looking near the top, near the middle, near the bottom. And people with neat offices are often the ones who can't find anything, because they put everything away, now they have to remember where they put it. So basically there's a hot spot for preferences, which is in the middle of the complexity range. And it's the part that we find engaging, and Jack Minson-Holly, of course, has talked about flow, the concept that what you want to do is you want to stay at this complexity level that's just slightly above your ability. Because if it's too easy, you'll give up, it's boring, not interesting. If it's too difficult, you get really frustrated. You need it to be challenging. And as I said, you can see that it's the proper level is a function of skill, and skill is a matter of expertise and practice and learning. So it's a moving target. Music again. From a design point of view, there's an interesting rule about complexity. There's an oversimplification, but it's a neat one. It was created by Larry Kessler, who at that time was at Apple Computer. And it's been called the law of the conservation of complexity. So Kessler's law says that complexity is constant. When you make something that's easy for somebody to use, maybe you've reduced the complexity to the person, but you've increased it behind the scenes. The automatic transmission is easier to drive than a car with manual shift. But the transmission now is much more complex underneath the hood of the car. So I love to give this example of coffee. This is an espresso machine. All the complexities in your face. You have to learn about each of the knobs and with the pressure and the temperature and how to grind the coffee properly and tamp it and make good espresso. The complexity is all external. This is how I make my coffee every morning. It's a Gaggia Italian espresso maker. I just push the button. There are 6 buttons you can see, and the upper right button turns it on, and below it there are 3 buttons, and I get to choose one. The one on the right is a standard espresso. The one in the middle is a medium-sized espresso. They call it a long in Italy, a longa. And on the left is what's called an Americano. So it's all the same. It's all the same coffee. It's how much water do you want in it. And simple, easy. But inside, it's very complex. Has a microprocessor, has motors, has gears, has grinders. You push the button, sure, and it grinds the coffee, which is in the upper right container, and it moves it down to this place here where it's going to make the coffee. Then it tamps it, and then it heats up the water to the right temperature, drops a little bit on the coffee grinds, stops and waits, lets the water soak into the beans. Then it takes the water, pressurizes it to high pressure, which is important for espresso, and pumps it through the beans at the right temperature, stops at the correct point. Then it takes the used coffee beans and dumps it into the container here on the right. And then the little display tells me when it's time to clean the container or add more water or add more beans. So inside, very complex. And once a month, we pay the price, or we have to take it apart and clean it. There's even another coffee maker, the Nespresso, and a whole bunch of pod makers, which are really easy for us to use. You just take a pod, put it in the machine, push a button, and you get your coffee. And the inside of the machine is simple. It just keeps the water, puts the water at the right temperature, knows how much to put through. The complexity is in the pod. So trying to manufacture a pod that maintains high quality taste, even though it might not be used for several months after the grinding and roasting of the coffee bean, is very, very difficult. So making the pods are what's difficult. So the complexity is kind of the same, metaphorically, in all 3, but it's been moved to different places in the cycle. Well, in the world of complexity, especially in design, it's one of the things we get frustrated at is needless complexity. And, you know, designing for the user is one of the things that we claim we should do as designers, but that's actually the enemy. Because whenever you design anything and give it to people, and if they like it, the first response is always, I love it, but why can't it do this? And the first people to use a device often are the reviewers. And the reviewers, their job is to say, why doesn't it do this, that, or the other? Or to take an automobile and see how fast you can go from 0 miles an hour to 100 kilometers an hour or 60 miles an hour, which no normal person ever does. But the problem is the reviewers have huge amount of influence on design and on purchases, because that's how you first learn about things. So we have reviewers and salespeople. Well-meaning salespeople. You come in, you've done your homework, you want to buy this device because it's understandable, it does just what you need, and the salesperson says, oh, why would you want to buy that? It doesn't do this, and shows you this other thing that does everything you wanted in the other device, but does a few more exciting things. And before you know it, you've ended up buying the more complex device. Many of you have probably fallen prey to that. I have, having decided exactly what I want and walk out of the store with something different. And simple-minded marketing, which is often done by feature comparison lists. So like, despite some missing features and performance issues that made it less than ideal, despite some missing features, please add the features. Or, basic features include vibrate mode, alarm clock, calendar, task list, memo pay, calculator, row clock, timer, currency, unit converter, a speakerphone, and stopwatch. You'll also find, but voice dialing is disappointingly absent. And so all that leads to feature creep. These cameras that have lots of controls on them and lots of complex menu structures. Lots of controls and lots of complex menu structures. 2 different brands of cameras, but equal in, I'll call it complexity, or should I call it complicatedness? Well, look at the feature comparison. So what cars should I buy? So I go to Yahoo, which provides this really nice comparison of different automobiles, and I say, okay, compare these 4 automobiles. And it says, okay, here's a bunch of features, and I'll tell you which are present and absent in the 4 cars. Well, that's kind of handy. That's nice. Except there's more. Except there's more. Except there's more. There's more. There's more. There's more. There's more. There's more. And finally, there's the end. This is real. You can do this yourself on Yahoo. So the feature comparison has just gotten out of hand. It makes no sense whatsoever. I think that in the mind of the public, and actually in the mind of many designers, there's this interesting trade-off between features and power. And that we sort of assume that the number of features related to the desirability of the product. That's what that last set of slides. This is especially what marketers think, who want to compare my product with your product by comparing the feature list of one with the other. So basically, capability goes up as we add features. And desirability goes up with capability. And there's also a belief that usability goes down as we add the number of features, and we certainly all have experienced that. And so that's the horrible trade-off. What I say, well, that's why people say I want simplicity, and that's why the marketing people say, no, we've got to add these extra features, and it's a standoff. Well, I think there are solutions. And there are several kinds of solutions. Some of it is something that we do ourselves or we benefit by, and I'll call those natural social signifiers. And some of the solutions are artificial and they're done by designers, good design. So let's look at that briefly. Look at social signifiers to start with. So here's a problem. I'm in Evanston or Palo Alto. The cities of Evanston and Palo Alto are remarkably parallel in many ways, both near a big university, both fairly close to a big city, both are 2 blocks away from Pete's and Whole Foods and the train station. So anyway, I want to get to the city. Chicago or San Francisco, and I run to the train station. Did I miss the train? Oh, well, there are people standing on the platform, so maybe I didn't miss it. Or, oops, the platform is empty. I guess I missed the train. So we use social signifiers a lot to help simplify our lives and understand what are happening. Now, these are obviously unreliable. The people might have been waiting for another train. Or maybe all of them missed the train, too. Or when it's empty, well, maybe nobody was interested in taking the train, and it hasn't come yet. And this, of course, doesn't work in the middle of the city where there are many, many trains coming and there are always people. But still, in places like Evanston and Palo Alto, it's a pretty good indicator. Where to walk? Well, watch where other people have walked. So in the field of landscape architecture, these are called desire lines. And the landscape architects have lots of papers and studies of how to stop them. People are destroying our landscape. They're walking where we don't want them to. They put up fences, they put up hedges, they put up warning signs. In one article I read, they figured out a way to stop people from cutting across the park. They put a lake in the middle. As opposed to saying, gee, maybe we should put a staircase there. This is UC Berkeley. What I find amusing about this photograph, I noticed it only recently, was the woman sitting in the chair watching. It's entertainment, too. And when I was at the design school at Technical University of Eindhoven, they proudly showed me this path going from the street to the school. And so what's special about that? It used to be a desire line, they said. It used to be, there was no path there, and people cut across the grass, and it was ruining the grass, and it was a bit dangerous. But instead of putting up signs and preventing people, they made it into a nice solid path. So that's the proper outcome. The other thing that we do is we often look at other people's behavior, and obviously this has become a big business now with recommender systems, right? Amazon says people who like this book, like that book, people who taste are like yours, like these other things. Netflix says the same thing, enjoyed by members. This movie was enjoyed by members who also enjoyed these other movies, which I happen to know you liked. New York Times and all of the periodicals now say, here are the most frequently emailed articles. So you might also enjoy reading them. This shows that people found them interesting. You also find natural signifiers like that's a bookmark saying where I stopped reading. But there's even more. If you look, you see marks. It's the sort of thing that Jim Holland and his friends once called wear marks. And they tried to build it into a technological system. So see those? Those indicate places where I stopped for a period of time or went back and forth to. And so in a reference book, these would often mark the most important parts of a book. I'm walking around running to this talk maybe, and I have a drink in my hand, but I don't want to take it in, or maybe I'm not allowed to. Where am I going to throw it? Suppose there's no trash can. Well, suppose I see, there's a flat thing, I can put it there. I'm not sure I should. Well, if one person does, that's a signifier suddenly. Now that becomes a social signifier to other people that, it's permissible, or it's really permissible. And you see these build up over time. And this is actually taken in Daejeon, South Korea, but the people at IDEO have lots of photographs of the same phenomenon from around here. So that was the social signifiers. Now let's look at some artificial ones. So for example, look at the messy desk syndrome. How do you handle that if you think it's a bad thing? Well, one of the early solutions was this. It's it was called the Wilton Patent Cabinet Office Secretary in the 1870s. A very expensive, very beautiful piece of woodworking. You can find these in many museums. Smithsonian has one. A place for everything, and everything has its place, was the advertisement. The problem is, you can never remember once you put them away. Out of sight, out of mind. They all look the same, the drawers and shelves. And so I consider that bad design. Or look at this, the remote control. These are mine. until I replace it with what I think is good design. So now let's talk about how one overcomes complicated stuff and makes it into understandable stuff. So here's how you solve the remote control problem. You don't do it by having a universal remote of the normal sort. Because I have a remote for the DVD player, and a remote for the TV receiver, and a remote for the audio receiver, and a remote for the game machine, and a remote for whatever. All those different things have different remotes, and the way people normally do universal remotes is they make this one remote. I can flip a switch and it's now this one, or flip another switch and it's that one, or flip another switch and it's that one. But it's not activity-centered. And so really good design is based on the activity you're trying to do and gives you just the tools you need for the activity. And this is the Harmony made by, I always forget, Logitech. Logitech's Harmony remote control, which I think does a brilliant job. This is actually also my TV set and remote. And it says, what activity do you want to do? You want to watch TV? Do you want to watch a movie? Do you want to listen to music? Do you want to listen to a CD? Do you want to play with the Wii? And you select it, and then when you've made your selection, like view a movie, you are given only the controls that you need in an understandable fashion. And a few of them are hard buttons on the right, because remember, this is made to be used in the dark, and you're trying to watch a movie, so you don't really want to watching the screen while watching the movie. So it's nice that I can control the volume or the channel if I'm watching television, and I can turn the mute on and off, or I can go fast forward and stop the things just by feeling the buttons on my right. But what they've done is they've modularized, compartmentalized, so that although the total thing is complicated, they've made it understandable by dividing it into small, meaningful units that fit the activity I'm doing. Well, Google does an excellent job, and all the search engines, by the way, they do equivalent things. If you want to do a complex search, well, you hit advanced search, and you're given something that helps you, leads you through, spelling out all the different things you care about. So, I want to know about, what does that say? Well, that's their example. Right. So I fill it out, and what it does is interesting, is it will tell me what language it's translated into, a simple control language, so that I can now start to learn the language. I can ignore it if I want, and always use this tablet, or I can therefore learn the language and then go in and modify the search terms directly. So it's both a good teaching tool, but also a very good usability tool. So part of the important point is to provide a really good conceptual model. If people have an understanding and a good conceptual model, I think it's not confusing. I can understand it. A really good example of that is the file structure of a computer, where that's the model we are given, which is very understandable. People can learn it and use it. As many of you will know, that's not how files are stored in the computer. There are no folders inside the computer, and even a file is not a single homogeneous thing. It's divided up into wherever it fits. But it's a model that is very effective in allowing us to do most of the operations we care about properly. So it transforms what would be a very confusing topic to one that everybody can use. It has its limitations because it is a simplification. One of the biggest limitations is deletion. If I want to delete a file, I either click on the delete command or I move it to the trash can. It doesn't matter. Whatever I do, it goes away. And so the model fits my notion of what deletion is. I don't want the file there anymore, and I tell it to go away, and it goes away, and it's no longer visible. The problem is it's still inside the computer, and it's still available to anybody with the right tools. And that has gotten some people in trouble. Fortunately, most of the people that gets in trouble are the bad guys who try to delete and don't understand how. Another solution is systems thinking. So why is the iPod so successful? I really do not believe it's successful because it's such a beautiful device. If you look at the competition, there are other devices that are maybe not quite as attractive, but almost as attractive, certainly have more functions, more memory, less expensive, but they are sold as isolated devices. And so the real difficulty then is, how do you get the stuff into it? How do you change what's in it? How do you keep it up to date? Whereas Apple realized that this was a system. The first thing that Apple did was make it legal. Before the iPod, it was not legal to transfer music to your own personal player. People were doing it, but they were technology people. The everyday person couldn't do it, and it was, in any event, it was not legal. So Apple was the first company to do the licensing deal. Second, where do you find the music? So Apple developed a website that made it very easy to find the music. And they made it very easy, once you found the music, to click on the thing you wanted and to have it paid for and download it to your machine. It was effortless. You didn't have to do anything special. You just said, I want that, and your money was automatically taken away from you, and it was put in, and the song was put in your machine. And then they made it very easy to plug the iPod into the computer, and all the music was on the iPod. Or when the music was in the computer, they made it very easy for you to see what was there and to select what you wanted to listen to and play or move to the iPod. So they thought of it as a system. And that's the power of the iPod. It's not the isolated one. And so many of the things that we do in life, the individual components are simple, but integrating them is very difficult. And it's integration, proper integration, that transforms complicated into complex and understandable. Same is true with the Kindle. The reason it won, I believe, in the beginning there were a bunch of e-book readers, but there were only two major ones. One was Kindle and one was Sony. And they were almost identical. They used the same technology made by the same company. Their prices were very similar. The books were roughly the same size. They were very, very similar. With the Sony, though, you had to go and find the books. And you had to make sure it was in a format that the Sony reader would understand. And then you had to get the books into your computer. And then you had to transfer it from the computer to your e-book. With the Kindle, computer, you don't need the computer. They took it as a system. So the wireless is built into the Kindle. At first it was cell phone wireless. Today it's a choice of cell phone or Wi-Fi. And all you do is you go to the Kindle store from the Kindle device, say what book you want, and a minute later it's on the Kindle. I have done this in lectures. I'm listening to a lecture, someone's talking about their new book, and it sounds really pretty good to me. And so while the person is still lecturing about the book, I take out my Kindle, go to the Kindle store, and I have the book in my hands, or in the Kindle, while the lecture is still going on. They made it so simple. They also use the proprietary format, a bit like Apple. The other thing Apple did with its iTunes was that you could only play the music on Apple devices. So the more music you bought, the more you're screwed, you're stuck. You can't buy it from any place else. And those of you with Kindles know that same thing is true with Kindle. So you may now think the Barnes & Noble Nook is better because it has a color screen and I can see the photos. And not only that, but it can show movies and dynamic illustrations. But gee, I have 100 books on my Kindle and I won't be able to read them on the Nook. That's it. So from the marketing point of view, that's brilliant. From the consumer point of view, that's horrible. Okay, so that's basically my story. So how do we cope with complexity? Mainly by understanding. And we understand through organization and structure, modularization, conceptual models are the major tools. And what you want is this good conceptual model, and the modularization and the organization and structure help, but it's also the designer's duty to provide a model, much like the one I showed for the file structure. We also may need some guidance, signs, basically, signifiers, and systems thinking that helps bring together the disparate parts, so it's very simple. And why do we need complexity? Because life is complex. Our tools must match life, and what we really want is understanding. So it's about design. Thank you. And now we take questions. Is there a mic, or do we just ask?
They have ceiling mics.
Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
Thank you for earlier you showed a graph about how people's preferences for complexity change with expertise.
Yes.
But oftentimes you see that a single system will be used by people of varying expertise. So do you have any thoughts on how to design something that can cater to people with different levels of expertise?
So the question says that, well, it's all very well to say that the preferred level of complexity varies with your skill level, but what happens when the system is used by a large variety of people who have different skill levels? Or, for that matter, I'm an expert, but I go away for a couple of weeks, and I come back and I don't remember, I have to back up. We had a conversation earlier today about human-centered design, where you really try to understand people and design just for them, and I'm saying, you know, it doesn't work when you're trying to design for everybody. I want this product to be used by everybody in the world. So that's a variant of the same question. And the answer is, we can do it. What we have to have is sort of the basic functionality is visible and understandable. And anybody can learn it and pick it up, because it's right there. But the more sophisticated operations are hidden, maybe take time to discover and learn. And maybe there are shortcuts. Simple example would be a command line interface where you can just type something, or on a normal graphical user interface, shortcut keys. I can type, you know, on this particular computer, I can type Command Shift Return in order to start the slideshow from the beginning. You have to memorize it. But if I didn't memorize it, I could go to the menu and try to find where it says start from the beginning, and it would be there. So that's a system that allows the expert to just use a shortcut, but the beginner, or someone who doesn't feel like taking the effort to learn it, to go back and search and find it. With the new gesture interfaces, that's the way it should be, but the gesture interfaces, people haven't learned that trick yet. We've stepped backwards in design quality, in my opinion, because the gestures can't be discovered. But that will happen. There'll be a little button to push that will make things happen, or you could do a shortcut gesture that will cause 3 or 4 things. But if you don't remember, or somebody who is not as experienced comes in, they'll do 3 or 4 separate steps to do it. So if the designer thinks about this properly, in my belief, there's no problem with making something that's understandable and discoverable for the person just starting out, and the expert can, though, just skip over that. Good example is the typing keyboard. You've never typed before. You can look at the keyboard and struggle and find the letters and type them. And as you get more experience, you know where you are, so your ability to find it gets faster and faster. And when you get really experienced, you no longer have to look. One keyboard that hits all levels of expertise. Yes?
So you talked about how, particularly with the iPod, the first problem that Apple solved was not just building the device, but solving the legal issues and then building the entire system to create a whole product that people could use. But in order to do that, you have to worry about also the timeline that you get involved with, right? Because if you solve all those issues before you even release the product, then you deal with the possibility that the product will come out after the market has gone after something else. So can you talk a little bit about balancing those two issues?
That's a whole course. And it's complex. That if you come out too soon, your product may fail. And at lunchtime, I was describing how proud I am with the several different products I've been associated with that are all failures. One of them was one of the very first, maybe it was even the first, commercial digital camera that failed. Produced by Apple. It was a good camera. It was ahead of its time. It was too soon. The market wasn't ready for it. The technology wasn't quite ready. On the other hand, if I tried to make something perfect, people who worked at interval research, I think, fell prey to this. They wanted it to be so perfect that by the time they released it, the market already had other things. Xerox had this problem when they invented the laser printer. They invented the laser printer, but actually they never IBM came out with a laser printer before Xerox did, even though Xerox had invented it. They were trying to do too much. And the first practical laser printer was done by Canon. And then the same, you're saying even a different example, which is even more complex. If we're dealing with legal or regulatory licensing issues, that can take a long time. It could delay the introduction of a valuable product. So that's what makes business so interesting. If it were easy, you know, it'd be much different. But design is complex. It has to intermingle with business considerations, with manufacturing considerations, with the marketplace, with the existing legacy products or new products or competitors. And so what you think you're doing may not be right. I've been involved in medical devices and medical safety. And there the major issues are not technology. So trying to do health information systems in the hospitals is really difficult. And it's a complex, it's a cultural issue, it's a legal issue, there's a legacy issue, there are cultural issues. Trying to introduce checklists is really difficult. It took 20 or 30 years for the aviation industry to accept checklists. The medical industry is now where the aviation industry was in the beginning. Why do I need a checklist? I mean, that person needs one, but I don't. So the things you talk about are really difficult, and that's why people get MBA degrees, and that's why professors exist in business schools. It's hard. That's why most startups fail. Most startups that have been winnowed down by the VC community, so they, of the hundreds of people proposing, they will only fund one or two, and of the ones that they've carefully selected, 90% fail for all these reasons.
Perhaps part of the reason why people fail in creating good design is the uncertainty inherent in the thing that they're trying to design, or the environment in which they're trying to deliver this design. How do good designers address uncertainty in the act of designing?
Well, kind of a question is how does a designer address the uncertainty when in the environment and the people and so on. And actually, most designers are not very good at this. Most designers don't know much about business. And I think that what designers really have to understand more about marketing, more about what makes people buy, and more about the business, what makes things profitable, and what the competitive environment is like. And there's a big difference between what people purchase and what people need. And designers focus primarily on what people need, which isn't the same as what people buy. And so we have to come to understand that. If you're doing research, that's fine, but if you're trying to produce practical products, you have to be sensitive to the distinction. So I think a lot of designers are simply not sensitive enough to the real world. Designers are in their own mythical, perfect world. That's a whole other lecture, too. How are we doing on time?
Another 10 minutes.
Oh, so we have lots of time. Yes?
So if people enjoy complexity and computer games are all about complexity, you must then advocate that design should incorporate more play elements? Is that the right perception?
No, but I'm not against it. So the point is, because that was a funny, it's a funny syllogism. If I think that there's an ideal level of complexity that makes things fun, and computer games manage to do this, then we ought to have more games or play in design. Well, doesn't quite follow. But we can learn a lot from good computer game designers. And a lot of the good computer designers, the game designers, actually are artists. They don't really know what they're doing. That is, in the sense of having a formal theory, having a formal description. They often cannot describe to you what principles they follow. They're just really good artists. And in general, I think we learn a lot by watching art. Much of science really follows art. There's a lot. If you look at the sensory systems, the artists are often far ahead of the psychologists in understanding it. And what we do as scientists, we see what the artists have done and we try to say, wow, I don't understand that, and we study it. And this has been true in a number of areas. The clever inventors often go ahead of our knowledge. And I see that in the game world. So I think, yes, we should, in games, in design, and let's talk about interaction design primarily, not about simple products like this, which is, or furniture or cooking utensils, but things that are fairly, have a number of parts. We learn a lot by watching what the artists have done and from game designers and how they manage to make varying levels of complexity still available to anybody who enters, and how they allow people to make, look, if you're going to learn some new complex topic, it's going to take time. So there's another point about living with complexity, is it takes two people to make it work. One is the designer to make it have a cohesion and understandability, but the other is for us to do the work to understand it. So we have to spend time learning it. And this is funny bit that, you know, it takes you a year to learn to use a pencil. It takes a couple of years to learn to use chopsticks. There are still people in Asia who can't use chopsticks well, even grown up in Asia. To learn language takes a decade, 2 decades. Learn to drive an automobile, you have to go to school and take some classes, and for the first year you're not very good. Yet when we buy a new piece of technology and it takes 15 minutes, we complain and say, why do they make it so hard? So there is some responsibility on our part to understand these things. So the trick from the designer's point, and the game people have done this very well, is if it's going to take time for somebody to learn to master this, how do I make it so that it's engaging time? So they're actually able to accomplish something all the way as they go. So it should be that in my first steps, I don't know very much, but I'm still doing something. I'm accomplishing something. And with time, I do more and more, and I feel better and better about it. And so not am I willing to spend the time to learn more, I'm anxious to learn more, because I know I can do even more. That's a good design trick. And that's where elements of play are apt to play a role. Yes?
I have 2 questions. One is our design practices getting better? Are we learning something through looking back at what others have done and the products that have come out, and are we getting better? And the second question sort of from that is, salt and pepper shakers are one thing. A single designer can sit down in an afternoon and design something, provide some output, but applying that to more complex things, and you touched on the systems thinking, which was great, the Apple system of music players and applications. But what about applied to, you know, a hospital or a really complex problem space where, you know, you have complexity in the design team, in the design process of getting to some solution?
So the first question is design getting better? Yes, but I think much more interesting is that it's changed its characteristic dramatically. In the early days of design, it really came from architecture and art. And designers were primarily focused on the object, and designers consider themselves craftspeople. If you go look at a design education, it's a 4-year undergraduate course. And I think it's really more of craft, or a trade even. And what you learn is you learn these wonderful skills. So you can learn to draw, you learn to sketch, you learn materials, you learn to fabricate, you learn about the details, you learn about what it takes to make, well, this particular beautiful, elegant piece, which is not only neatly crafted, but is manufactured and machined in ways that other people didn't think was possible. You learn a craftsmanship. And it's only in graduate school, if you go to design, you start learning some principles. But the main principles you learned were, I think, historical. You looked at previous designs and you copied them or you changed them. And most of Apple comes from Braun, B-R-A-U-N, the German company. That if you actually look at the iPods and look at the early Braun products, they're very similar. This is not I'm not criticizing them. In fact, Johnny Ives, who's the main designer, is proud of that fact, that because design in the traditional sense is like art in the traditional sense, is that you learn about the other artists and you build upon them while still doing your own thing. But all that's about appearance. And it's not about how we use it, an interaction. And it's not about what we call human-centered, so that people really can understand and use it. That's been a big change, and I believe that change started with the computer, with the home computer. The field of human-computer interaction started with the first early PCs. There was work before that. Airplane cockpits are a good example. But the real field started, and interaction design started with the development of the first PCs, and we started to realize there were psychological principles like feedback, like conceptual models, like affordances, like constraints, etc., that could be applied. And that's very foreign to most designers. And today, design is still taught as an art. At CMU, technology school, the design department is in the School of Art, and the dean is a piano player. And at most schools, the design is located in the arts and humanities, or there's separate design schools, like the Rhode Island School of Design, which is mostly art, or Pasadena School of Design, which is mostly art, or the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is inside the Art Institute, and they care about art. Design is art. So we need a new breed of designer. And what we now have is this really funny thing. We have human-computer interaction as a discipline, with people really learning to understand about the way new technologies are evolving and used. And we have a design discipline, but they too seldom talk to each other. And so the stuff that HCI people put out tend to be ugly. They're not very good at communicating the real principles that they themselves are talking about. And we have communication designers. There's a field of communication design. People study a lot about how you communicate concepts. But unfortunately, they don't work with the technologists. So I think that we're getting better. We're doing more exciting things, but we need to change our educational practices. So here's another problem for you, another topic, another lecture. In the university, we pride ourselves on specialists, people who are the world authority on a topic. And the way to become a world authority is become very specialized and quite narrow. You're really good at this. In the world of business and industry, we have to produce products, and products require expertise across a wide number of specialties. They require generalists. Well, universities don't train generalists, because actually the generalist faculty member would either never get hired, or if they were hired by accident, they wouldn't get promoted. Because in any given field, you need to get letters from the world's authorities to see if this is a great person, and they would say, well, it did an interesting paper, but I haven't seen anything since then. And we need more generalists, and designers are generalists. And right now, though, they're generalists in art, and maybe on materials, but not enough. I think they need to have much more training in social sciences and the technologies. A lot of designers hate technology. They hate numbers. Even at KAIST, where I teach, where it's a highly technical university, Korean Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. So every student has to take in the first 2 years calculus and science. The ones who hate it are the ones who end up in the design department. And it's a similar way, by the way, engineers hate people. But what's engineering about? It's about designing things and developing things that are to be used by people. And if you actually look what modern design is about, it's applied social sciences. And there's a big thing about we need to have better STEM, education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I listened to your president recently give a nice talk about how we must increase training in STEM at Stanford, among other places. So, you know, Hennessy is going on and on about STEM. STEM has S for science, which does not include the social sciences. And take a look at all the, and if you, doesn't include design. And I think STEM needs a D. And it goes in both ways. Designers should learn more about science, including the social sciences, technology, education, engineering, and math. But the engineers, especially the technologists, should learn more about the social sciences and about design. And most engineers will say, oh, we do that. We have a design class, and we even have design projects. And they do. But engineering design is not the same as what we're talking about, the human-centered design. It's really about making something that's effective. You, for example, did this project on the egg drop. The goal, as many of you may know, is to devise out of very simple materials, like a few pieces of paper or something, or cloth or something. So you wrap the egg and you can drop it out of the third-story window and it goes to the ground and doesn't break. It's a wonderful project. Students love it. You can do all sorts of experiments, but it's got nothing to do with human-centered design. No people. And so engineers love that one too. But if you try to have engineers do a design project, which involves people, like you take them to the medical school or something, what they'll start saying is, stupid people, didn't they understand? So design is getting better, but I think our education is a problem, and we really need to change that. We have some great designers, by the way, who do great jobs, who overcame all these, but in every case that I've seen, they've been self-taught. They've been interested enough to go and learn about these things. It's really hard to get in the traditional educational setting.
I think we're going to have to wrap up, but feel free to come up and ask Don questions.
Too late. I answer. I use your questions as excuses for mini lectures, so sorry about that, but our time is up.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.